The apparent ease with which violent protesters stormed past security and into the Capitol building left most people in the nation aghast. While the circumstances still remain unclear, the scene turned deadly after a woman who was shot inside the Capitol died in the hospital. It took hours to finally clear the Capitol building and the grounds, but there are now new questions about just how law enforcement could have handled the situation. For a better perspective now on yesterday's events, we are joined by Larry Cosme. He is the national president of the nonpartisan Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, which represents more than 29,000 officers employed by 65 federal agencies. So happy to have you on this morning because, boy, you know, as people were watching what was taking place yesterday, I kept on looking at what seemed like a handful of officers at the Capitol building, particularly early on. And I just thought there's no way they can do anything with this mob that is descending on this building. You put out a statement yesterday denouncing the riots as anarchy as a law enforcement officer based in D.C. Before I even start to talk to you about strategy and whether they were prepared, I just want to get your take on what you saw. Our Major Garrett spoke really poetically about the Capitol building, about, you know, how when you're in D.C., you can see it from a distance as a glowing example of our democracy. And to see this mob descend on this building, I'm wondering what you were feeling as you were watching that.
Oh, it was a feeling. I was upset to see that something like this would happen in our country. But thank you for having me on. But absolutely, it's something that's totally unacceptable. No one should have the ability to breach the Capitol building and assaulting federal law enforcement officers. They should be held accountable for assaulting federal law enforcement officers, and he should be held accountable for the possibility of trying to hurt elected officials that are directly in a chain of succession if something happens in our country. Mm-hmm. And in a country that we live in, I was totally shocked at the fact that they didn't have additional reinforcements. And that goes to the leadership of the Capitol Police. They should have called in for reinforcements a lot quicker. We support the U.S. Capitol Police officers 150%, and I'm totally shocked how these individuals assaulted them. It was clearly on television how they were assaulting these officers. And that is total anarchy. You know, they should not be doing this. And whether it's Antifa, whether it's this group or any other group assaulting officers, that's totally unacceptable. And we're in total disagreement with that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know, I do want to say that, you know, the police officers, the National Guard, Secret Service, I mean, they went above and beyond, you know, what we saw in terms of protecting the individuals within the Capitol building. But that being said, it certainly looked like law enforcement was woefully unprepared. And I don't know why, because they knew that these demonstrations were occurring. When you saw how few officers were at the Capitol building, and you know, some of this stuff is still being investigated, right? But certainly there were suggestions or accusations that barriers had been removed. Who's responsible here for clearly there was a failure, or else people would not have been able to enter the building that way? Who's responsible for this failure, and what did you see? Yeah, I understand you're watching from a distance, but I'm sure you've talked to your fellow law enforcement officers. As you were watching, could you just see, you know, this was a mistake, this was a mistake, this was an oversight? What did you see that could have been done better?
Well, I did speak with members that we have on the ground after the fact. Obviously, not during the fight, but multiple layers of, like, the interior barriers, the exterior barriers, and multiple personnel could have been brought in early on. But here's what happens. You know, the Capitol Police is under the direct appropriations of U.S. Congress. They have the direct oversight. It's in a different area in terms of the federal budget and appropriations. So I'm sure that there will be some investigations on this, you know, to what happened, you know, the failures of what happened here, or why there was less personnel on the ground, or the barriers, how they were set up. But clearly there was no, you know, like some media has been reporting that the officers allowed people to run through. That's not true. These officers fought back to the bitter end, and they were being attacked, obviously, as clearly as it was on some of the video footage that you could see. And they did an outstanding job under the circumstances that they were dealt and the ability to fight, a massive group like this that breached the Capitol.
So you just brought up two things that I kind of want to pursue. One was to sort of make it clear to people that, the U.S. Capitol is a little bit different than,
Yes.
Other cities with police forces. There are various sort of layers of coverage, whether it's the Secret Service,
Yes.
whether it's the Capitol Police. So can you just talk about how, and I don't know, can the setup of the U.S. Capitol, the way law enforcement works there, make them less nimble or less make it more difficult to get reinforcements as quickly as they needed them?
No, I mean, the setup is fine as far as the ability to get reinforcements. It just has to be a coordinated effort early on. And obviously, everyone knew that this was going to take place, this protest. It was no secret. I'm talking about as far as the leadership and how the direct appropriations and oversight, it's handled directly by Congress, not by the executive branch. So that's something that's different, and it's not handled by a different department. But as far as the ability to help each other out, I mean, it's always worked well where the Secret Service, both the special agents that we represent, the uniformed officers, the Capitol Police, the U.S. Marshals, you have divisions of Homeland Security that also help out, and whoever is obviously in the immediate area can help out, and even the Metro Police for the city of Washington, D.C. But it has to be a coordinated effort early on. I'm not sure. I'm going to get some more information later on from talking to our members and people that I know within the organization. What didn't happen? How come it didn't? They didn't have the reinforcements that they should have had early on. That's still information that I'm gathering.
So listen, you brought up something else. There's all sorts of stuff circulating on social media about officers taking selfies with some of these demonstrators, rioters, whether or not barriers had been pulled aside. And there certainly is a photo that's been circulating, right? That has been showing. It's an image of the National Guard in front of the Lincoln Memorial on June 2nd, and this is in response to Black Lives Matter protests, essentially mostly peaceful protests. And there has been a lot of comparing and contrasting to like that image versus what we saw yesterday where the Capitol steps were overrun with these protesters or these rioters, this mob. And it's not just that. A lot of people have suggested that perhaps part of the lack of preparedness had to do with who they thought they were preparing for. That during the summertime, during these protests, these Black Lives Matter protests, there was a ramping up of law enforcement in a way that wasn't present here because, they saw these Trump supporters as not as much of a threat. Can you respond to that?
I think what I believe what happened here, I don't believe it has anything to do with the race or any other issue. I think what happened, there was an intelligence failure in terms of the gathering of the intelligence, the preparation failure at the leadership level, not at the front line level of the folks that we represent. It was at the highest leadership levels here, and I'm sure that people will be held accountable, for that. But in contrast, what happened with the BLM or Antifa, where they had obviously different intelligence or information, but the preparations should have taken place and they should have been prepared. And for the most part, like even with whether it was the BLM or even this group, the good majority were peaceful, with the exception, obviously, of quite a few hundred folks that still had the ability to overrun the Capitol. And like I said, they should be charged. They should be held accountable for assaulting federal law enforcement officers, for breaching the Capitol. There's plenty of federal statutes they violated, and they should all be charged to the fullest extent of the law. And that's another issue when we have these riots or we have these protests or assaults on law enforcement. What happens is that these individuals get charged with lesser charges, and then they get downgraded to a misdemeanor or a lesser offense. What they should be charged is with felony charges, and it will stop a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, well, we will see. Certainly there were a lot of them out there posting on social media, maskless. I'm sure that many of them will be identifiable once the dust settles. Larry, Cosme, thank you so much. I could keep talking to you, but we're running out of time.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you for having me on this morning, and have a great day. Thank you.